I'm Sarah. Welcome back to my channel. On this channel, we talk about all things music ed, especially ways to make your classroom more meaningful and joyful for you and your students. This is part 2 of 2 videos on how to do a Grieg unit in grades K and 1. So if you haven't seen the first video, check that out. And if you don't know what I'm talking about in this video, make sure you check out the first one, or you can check out the accompanying blog post I have that I'm going to link below on how to use Grieg in your K and 1 elementary music classrooms. So in summary, repeating things, doing things again is fine. I guarantee you there is no classroom teacher who introduces a concept and does it once. They do things multiple times. Repetition is good. So you can go through as many of those activities again as you want. If you want to change them up a little bit, like if you are going to repeat butterfly, you can use scarves. You could do a special, like you could make up a move it to March of the Trolls. Again, for that 1 minute segment. You don't need to do the full song. Stick to short, manageable chunks. Today we're going to continue, so this is Grieg Day 2, we're going to continue with our listening and responding and imagining with Wedding Day at Trollthagen, which I think I first heard on my husband and I honeymooned in Scandinavia, and we went to Norway and we saw the Grieg Museum in Bergen, and on the plane ride there was this whole like Grieg playlist, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so cool, all this Grieg music I don't know. But anyway, that's how I discovered Wedding Day at Trollthagen. Again, it's a longer song. We only listen to a chunk of it. That's all they need. Wedding Day at Trollthagen. I just refer to it as Wedding Day when we start talking about it. I give them that title, but it's also, I think it's possible that students that young in K and 1 have never been to a wedding before. They might know like, oh, it's when people get married, but you might want to just have a very short discussion about what a wedding is, what you might see at a wedding, what people might do at a wedding. Again, to get their imaginations going and thinking about what they're hearing or seeing as they listen. You could do squilt to Wedding Day. I find that the first the chunk that I use for Wedding Day is about 1 minute and 40 seconds. I think that is too long for students to sit with their eyes closed when they've just learned or just practicing how to do that. So instead of doing squilt for Wedding Day, I have made up a movement routine to the first 1 minute and 40 seconds that we do. So I lead it and they follow. It's a seated movement activity where we imagine ourselves as gnomes and fairies and trolls with a few other motions tossed in there just to match what's happening in the music. And I'm gonna link a separate video to that again because copyright issues. But that video is going to be hosted on the blog post that I have. I'll just, that's linked below. As you know, everything I mentioned here is going to be linked below. If you're familiar with Wedding Day at Trollthagen, this is, and I'm using the orchestral version. I believe there's a piano version, but we listen to the orchestral version for all the timbral and textural differences. This is after the whole orchestra comes in with the main theme and it starts to wind down, and it's right before it goes into the slower contrasting section. That movement activity, my own Move It, is another springboard. So we perform the movement activity one time, we think about, or we talk about what we might have seen in our heads, either as a class or as turn talks with each other, parent shares, whatever you want to call them. Again, there might be a wide range of responses. Students thinking, I saw a cake, I saw flowers, I saw a troll tripping over the dessert table. And there may be students who just go, I saw a gnome walking, and that's fine. Everyone is moving at their own pace. You are leading them and helping them practice. Students are hearing what their peers are imagining in their heads. And this is all coming together at everyone's own pace. Don't be afraid of repeating. I've said that so many times before. I've repeated it. Don't be afraid of repeating the movement activity. Don't be afraid of doing it 2 or 3 times, where you might ask sort of a higher level question each time, or you might give them just this time when we do the movement routine, the movement activity. I want you to picture what the fairies could be doing. I want you to picture what the gnomes could be doing. All of this imagining and this sort of story building in their heads is so good for students. And Grieg, I'm gonna say it again, is the perfect composer to help students do that on their own originally in their heads. All of that probably takes us through a second class. I do a third class on Grieg. I see students once a week. There's a good chance that a student will be absent for one of those days, so I would hate for them to get only one Grieg class if I did 2. There's just so much awesome music and activities that we do. So I do a 3-day mini Grieg unit. And on this 3rd day, we focus on morning mood. And we do squilt, and we do a fun puppet activity. There's actually a ton you can do with morning mood. I know that's one of the ones that if there's 2 songs that students already know by Grieg, it's Hall of the Mountain King and Morning Mood. But again, on day 3, you're probably going to repeat something that you did last time. So you may start the class with Wedding Day this time instead of March of the Trolls. I mean, if your students particularly responded to that, follow their lead, do the stuff that they responded really well to. Sing the Grieg song, recall those basic facts. But today, the main activity is going to focus on morning mood. And there are several things you can do with this. If your students need or want to practice squilt with morning mood, you can do that. The excerpt that I use is about 1 minute and 26 seconds, which is it's a little bit long for squilt. So I might give them, what I might say is, we're going to close our eyes with the first part, but when the music gets loud, open your eyes. Open your eyes and do a big stretch. Open your eyes and do a big yawn, because morning, waking up, that's just something that I thought of. But you could try to squilt it, or at least squilt part of it, or just use a shorter chunk than I do. You could do a listening log. If your students have done listening logs before, I have 3 different versions as freebies in my TPT store. You could do a seated movement activity. What I do if our eyes are open is, because the beginning of morning mood is that sort of call and response with the flute and the oboe. I do 1 hand for the flute, 1 hand for the oboe, and eventually they get closer together. And then the whole orchestra it has that beautiful sunrise moment where I do some big motion, and you can make it up. I mean, you can make this stuff up yourselves as teachers, or you could have students react on their own. You could give them scarves. You could say, just move your arms, or just move your hands, and show me what is happening in the music as we listen to morning mood, or what happened, guiding questions in the morning. What happens? What do we do in the morning? What other things could be happening outside in the morning? You could talk about animals, and actually the other thing that I do with morning mood is that puppet show activity, or puppet activity. It's technically a puppet show. This is not my product, but I did purchase it from Creative Technology Pedagogy's TBT store. You can make your own morning mood puppet show. So what I just had my students do was make little straw puppets. So they colored in the graphics that came with the product. It was little creatures, and I just had them tape them to straws. And once we had gotten familiar with morning mood, we acted out our own scene with the animals or the critters that we had chosen. So with morning mood, students are playing, they're imagining, they could be drawing. It's all so open-ended. And because you're using short excerpts, you can afford to repeat and have students focus on something else, or draw the melody in the air, or use the scarf up high when you hear loud, when you hear big music. All of this music is so open-ended. That is another reason why I spend 3 days instead of 1 or 2, because there's so much to do with it. And students get so much practice listening and responding and imagining. You can see that there's a ton of potential with Edvard Grieg. And we didn't even touch Hall of the Mountain King. You could do Hall of the Mountain King in Halloween, not talk about Grieg at all, and then bring it back later in the spring when you teach more about the composer himself, and say, oh hey, guess what? This piece that we know from Halloween is actually written by Edvard Grieg too. Which might make a lot of sense by then, once they know that he loves to write music with those special names. I hope you got a ton of ideas from this video about how to teach Grieg to lower elementary students. If this video resonated with you, if you got a lot of information out of it, I would appreciate it if you could like or comment or subscribe to my channel, because that helps other music educators like you find my content and learn from it. You can connect with me further on Instagram and TikTok. I'll leave those links below. I also have an email list. If you're interested in joining the ADM community, I send 1, sometimes 2 emails a week about different music teacher toolbox tips and tricks and advice and lesson plans that are aimed at elementary music teachers, so K through 4. If that's something you're interested in, I will leave the subscribe link below. Have fun with Grieg and happy music making.